Yes, and welcome to the program. Now, first things first, what do you make of the cabinet? Any notable appointments?
Yeah, quite a few of it. We saw the appointment of a few key politicians. And one thing that was really very explicit is the appointment especially of former governor of Lagos State, Governor Babashola Fashola. He's going to be heading the ministry that is the Department of Power and Road and Transport and Works. Now the departments used to be very separate, so it's more like you're bringing three different departments together. He did a great job in Lagos, being the governor of Lagos State for 8 years, and he changed Lagos. Lagos was a very chaotic city. He came in and changed the road network, relocated a whole lot of people and bring some sort of sanity into the city of Lagos, which is a city that is housing about 20 million people. For that, we've seen that appointment. And we also saw the appointment of General Dambazu, who is going to be the Minister for Defense. And I think for me that is a key appointment because the national security of Nigeria, especially with Boko Haram, you need someone that is really an expert in that area. And he's an expert. He has a PhD, in just studying security measures and all that. So I think that is a very key, those are very key appointments. We saw the Minister for Finance, someone who a lot of people thought she's a novice because she's still very much young, I think the youngest of them all. And a lot of people feel she doesn't really have what it takes with experiences. But I think for maybe General Buhari, he wants people that will get the job done. And that is very important for him. And we also have Department of Agriculture. Audu Ogbe is heading the Department of Agriculture. And agriculture is one area that Nigeria has really left, neglected because of oil, obviously. Sometimes as a Nigerian, I do pray that the oil will finish, just so we can concentrate on agriculture, because back in the 1960s and 70s, agriculture was huge. Cocoa, timber, granite from Kano, where we had one of the bomb blasts, was it yesterday or so? It was very huge, timber, coffee. We used to really be very good with it. So I think that this present government is trying to take us back to that era where we produce our own food. 80% of the food that Nigerians consume is not produced by Nigerians. So that is not really a good state of our agriculture.
Now, Solomon, you mentioned the new Minister of Defense, and I want us to shift focus to Boko Haram.
Yeah.
Boko Haram has been declared the world's deadliest terror group. I mean, you saw the statistics that we mentioned earlier on, how more than 6,000 people were killed last year, and it's more than what ISIS killed last year. What's the reaction to these shocking statistics?
I think it's become almost normal for Nigerians right now. And if you look at from when Boko Haram, came into being, from between 06 and 07 and until now, about 17,000 people, have lost their lives in mosques, in churches, in streets, in the markets, and a lot of people are beginning to get to a place where it's almost becoming like normal now. And that is one of the dangers. Once we accept it and it becomes normal, then we cannot really face it head on. But Boko Haram, they have killed a lot of people, and they've gone into, one of their tactics before now was to go into a village or a town and totally, take ownership of the village, get the leaders out, the traditional leaders and the political leaders out, and they take charge of the village and they kill people there. But now we've seen that the military has been able to kind of stop them from doing that. They don't go into new territories anymore. So what they've decided to do is what we saw happen in the capital city of Adamawa State, Yola, and also in the central part of Kano. So a lot of people are beginning to say, look, what do we do? Security measures are being put in place in mosques, in churches, where you have to park your car like 500 meters away, and walk all the way. There's security before you go into a mosque, before you go into a department and all that. So people are beginning to almost normalize it. And for me, that's one of the dangers where we feel we're beginning to live with terrorism, where terrorism becomes very normal. And the younger generation that are coming up will feel is normal. And how are we sure Boko Haram is not breeding the next generation of terrorists?
Now, Solomon, you've just mentioned the fact that it's becoming a norm. People are getting used to it. And what we'd like to know is, why is the fight to defeat Boko Haram taking so long?
We have to look at a whole lot, and we have to start at, looking at the Nigerian military. Because if we're to defeat Boko Haram, we have to use the Nigerian military. And the Nigerian military in itself, in the last 10 years or so, has not been functional for me. They have lost the pride. Growing up, a lot of my friends, everybody wanted to join the Nigerian military. I wanted to join it, but they said I was too short. It was more like the in thing. It was more like that's what you want to do. Every young person. But in the last 10 years again, they've lost their strength, they've lost their pride, they've lost their reputation. One, because the Nigerian military has allowed itself to accept and embrace the corrupt culture that we have in Nigeria. The Nigerian institutions are very, very corrupt. From the government to the police to schools, everywhere you go to is so much corruption. Now, corruption managed to now infiltrate the Nigerian military, and where you have resources and monies that was meant for procurement of arms and equipments for the military are not used the way that it should be. So that really handicapped the Nigerian military. So to attack Boko Haram, they cannot really do that effectively. They don't really have the fighter jets the way that they should. If you read the news recently, the former military advisor, the NSA, they call him National Security Advisor, to President Goodluck Jonathan then, he is the top security person in the nation, not even the Minister of Defense. He's the one that advises the president, and between the president and the Minister for Defense. And we just saw, he is right now under house arrest. He's going to go to courts for being charged for embezzling about over $2 billion. That was meant to be used to procure equipment for the military. So we've seen a lot of that coming in. So you send the military guys, the soldiers, to go out there and not to fight effectively. They're not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to achieve any sort of result. And for me, a lot of it is just because the military, who is supposed to be the custodian of Nigerian nation, who is supposed to be unblemished, who is supposed to be uncorrupt, allowed itself to face the corruption to come in. And what we are seeing the current government is trying to do is to try to, there's a lot of retirement, so a lot of them, the leaders, are going out. Would they be able to really clean it up and really restore that pride, restore that reputation? And if they really want to do that, then the first thing they have to do, 6 months into the government of President Muhammadu Buhari, is to defeat Boko Haram. Then the nation is going to begin to look at them with prestige again.
Now, you've just mentioned the high levels of corruption in Nigeria, and I think we've had this conversation before, where we were saying a big part of the reason why the country is in the state that it's in, especially in terms of Boko Haram, is because of corruption. Let's look at this more in depth. In terms of going forward in fighting this, Nigeria is currently going through a financial crisis of some sort. They're currently going through an economic downturn.
Right.
Within the economic downturn, how do they turn this around? Because money is needed. We understand that Boko Haram is able to fight because they have the capacity, and the capacity comes through the militia that they have, through the financial support that they have. So how does the government then balance things out between eradicating poverty, dealing with the socioeconomic issues that they have, but also fighting Boko Haram? Because it's in a very difficult position right now, I would imagine.
Yes, most definitely. I think for Nigeria, for me, it's like a piece of cake that we just have a lot of people coming to take a piece of it, and it's happened quite a lot. We saw politicians taking a piece of it. We saw, government leaders taking a piece of it. We've seen economic leaders taking a piece of it. We've seen banks taking a piece of it. Because a lot of banks were shut down, a few years ago because of that. So everyone is just like, look, I just want a piece of that cake. And there are billions of dollars in the hands of Nigerians right now. If you go to Dubai, if you go to Geneva in Switzerland, if you go up to London in the UK, or you go to the US, and what the current government, I know they're trying to do, is try to follow the money. How do you get that? President Buhari was in the US recently, and he said that President Obama handed him a list of names of money, of names of people that have a lot of monies going through. So for me, the monies that are going through out there alone is just a lot of money, because the level of corruption in Nigeria, you would never understand it. Someone would go in and take, you just embezzle. because there's no sense of accountability. But how do we do that? How do we also make sure we reduce the money that is being the budget for states, expenses for state, just so we could push that towards security? The budget for each year for Nigeria, about 20% of it goes to security. But we don't. Boko Haram is still existing. So what happened to the 20% of the national budget? We're talking about billions of dollars here.
Now, Solomon, two questions, two parts. The issue of corruption. Is this one of the reasons why President Muhammadu took almost 6 months to appoint his cabinet? And the second part of it is there's a deadline that he's set for December. Is this realistic?
I feel December is not realistic. And I think he mentioned it also. Why? Because I think he's beginning to understand the depth of the weakness and the ineffectiveness of the Nigerian military. Maybe from the outside you would think, no, we just need a leader that will go in and take over, give orders, but you cannot really fight and take over Boko Haram if you don't do that. From my perspective, personally, I said a year. You know, a year is a good time to evaluate and see, because a year you can now reinforce the army, you can now strengthen the army, you can now get your strategies right, get the right people in, and then you go in and you see what sort of result you're going to get. And then to the first question was about, you know, corruption.
His appointment, yes. Appointment of cabinet, why it took so long. 6 months is a very long time for a president to come in and have no cabinet and be handling everything himself. Also bearing in mind that dealing with the issue of Boko Haram, you know, it takes a lot of strength for any individual to deal with that situation. Why so long to appoint a cabinet? Is corruption a main player in that time frame?
I would think so, because in the last days of President Goodluck Jonathan, there was a lot of issues about corruption, from the central bank governor, which is like the Reserve Bank governor, to the Minister for Finance, to the Minister of Petroleum, who is currently in London. You know, she left just before President Buhari took over. She said she had cancer, so she's going through chemo right now. But then allegedly she's embezzled over $2 billion already. Even the police, the Scotland Yard police in London, invited her to speak to them, to her. So you want to appoint, because of the state of the different institutions in Nigeria, from the petroleum ministry, President Buhari made himself a minister also. He's the Minister for Petroleum. So he was the Minister for Petroleum back in the late 70s. So this is not the first time. He's very much aware of that. So, and he knew that, look, petroleum brings in a lot of revenue for Nigeria. If we can get this right and get our refineries right, then that's going to go a long way. But then also, because of the state of the different departments, the ministries, you have to be careful who you appoint. You want to appoint your cronies, your fellow politicians who really got you here, or you want to appoint the right people, or you want to go even outside of your political party, the APC, and say, look, he's a very good technocrat. How can we bring him in and put it in? And I feel he has really made the right choice. We have the new Minister for Solid Minerals. A lot of people felt the minister, he's a very smart younger person, and a lot of people felt he should have been given maybe the Department of Finance or Petroleum. But I feel he put him in the solid minerals because Nigeria has a lot of minerals, but we've not been able to really say, how do we get it going? How do we build our mining industry? We've never been able to do that. All we zoom in on is just petroleum. So maybe with those choices, again, we would never know if the choices were right or wrong, until maybe about 18 months or 24 months later. Then we can really evaluate and see how far and what they're able to do.
Now, Solomon, let's shift focus from government and focus more on the sentiments of the people of Nigeria. You know, Nigeria has witnessed a lot of internal strife, but they've always remained united in some way.
Yeah.
But now you've got the Igbo people calling for an independent state.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is going to pose a threat to that unity that we've always seen?
A little bit of it. I would want to think the fight and the campaign to create a Biafra state by the Igbos I would want to think is political. It's not just about the Igbos feeling marginalized in Nigeria. Now the Igbos are like Chinese. Any part of Nigeria you go to, you see an Igbo person. You go to the village, you see an Igbo, because they're blessed with entrepreneurial skills. They're good business people. You know, they know how to make money. So I don't see how the Biafra nation would exist with so many Igbo people that are scattered all over Nigeria and all over the world, you know. And back in the day when the Civil War happened in the 1960s, from 1967 to 1969, it was 2 years of civil war. Over 1 million people died. You know, even South Africa supported Biafra, just to let you know. I mean, it was apartheid South Africa, but South Africa supported Biafra. Ivory Coast supported Biafra. Gabon supported Biafra. They recognized Biafra as a state, led by Brigadier Ojukwu. But still, they couldn't state themselves. So the Igbo people, I feel, from Biafra Radio, led by the guy who's under detention right now, Nnamdi, I feel it's kind of like a selfish drive by certain people, and there's no way the Igbo people can exist by themselves. The Igbo people need the rest of Nigeria to exist. How would the Igbo people now exist on their own? I would feel they don't have what it takes to exist on their own. Their space would not be enough for them. They will still need, you know, the northern part of Nigeria, the eastern part of Nigeria, the southern part of Nigeria. They will still need, you know, all that. But if they feel they've been marginalized and not been given a fair treatment, you know, in the broader concept of Nigeria, I think every part of Nigeria, the northern people, the Hausas will feel the same thing, the Yorubas will feel the same way, the Fulanis will feel the same way, that we've not been treated very well in this. Should we then say, okay, the Igbo people take your country, the Yorubas take your country, the Fulanis take your country, or should we then just sit down and really say, look, this is our grievances, how do we sort it out? And that's why I feel we need the Igbo people in Nigeria, you know, but it's going to be difficult for them to want to create a state out of it.
Yeah. Now, Solomon, let's get a little controversial. Attacks in Paris, the whole world jumps up. It's an outcry. There's a serious outcry. Boko Haram has been staging attacks in Nigeria for the longest time. I mean, even looking at the stats, the number of people who have been killed by Boko Haram attacks, and you compare them with the ISIS attacks, a lot less.
Yeah.
Boko Haram is leading. Now, why do you think there's a lot less attention on Boko Haram attacks in Nigeria or just outside Nigeria in neighboring countries, whether it's Chad or Niger? And an attack happens in Paris. It's happened before. Early in the year, I think, there was an attack in Paris.
Yeah.
The whole world stood up and there was an outcry. Now, the same thing has happened. More people have died. Why is there a discrepancy? Why are we viewing these as different issues, whereas there's a lot of common denominators within it?
Well, Lulu, I would want to think that we are Africa, you know, we're not a priority. That's just the bottom line. Politically, we're not a priority. Economically, we're not a priority. We're not friends with the nations that have the big military, because once you have the big military, you try to make friends with other nations that have big military, and you can do whatever you want to do. We're not a priority. The number of deaths through Boko Haram, close to 7,000 right now, it's not really a big deal. You know, no disrespect to the lives that was lost in Paris. You know, it's sad. So it's two different conversations going on. We can sympathize with Paris, I would not sympathize with the French government, but I would sympathize with the lives, the innocent lives that was lost. But I would not sympathize with the system, the French system, which I don't agree with a lot of it. I would not sympathize with their policies when it comes to dealing with nations, invading nations, or making decisions for nations that is not really, you know, would put the whole nations in chaos and creating lawlessness like we've seen in Libya today. I would not do that. And there's no way we're going to exist in peace if there is injustice. And there's a lot of injustice that was created by a lot of Western nations. And because of that injustice, political injustice, economical injustice, ISIS is able to use young lives, innocent people, to try to get them into doing what they're doing right now. I don't agree with ISIS, but to be honest with you, I agree with their cause. Not the way they kill people, not the way they blow up people, but there is a sense of injustice somewhere, somehow, right, sitting
Solomon,
right there.
we would need an entire hour, an entire day to complete this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been interesting, and I think we've unpacked a lot of things. It's always great having you on Your World.